Welcome to the debate. Today, we are diving deep into a really fundamental split in national economic policy. We're looking at two pretty comprehensive frameworks for how you achieve sustained and, importantly, equitable growth.
That's right, and the core question we're grappling with is, well, it seems simple on the surface, but it has massive consequences. Should national economic policy really focus on maximizing private incentives, through broad tax cuts, regulatory relief, or do we need to prioritize strategic public investment and sort of market leveling rules to make sure that growth is actually broad-based and, frankly, resilient?
Exactly. And I'll be arguing the case that growth fundamentally, it comes from unleashing private enterprise. It's about letting capital allocation happen through efficient, competitive markets. My focus is really on reducing that structural friction to promote speed, efficiency, and private capital formation.
And I'll be taking the contrasting view. Markets they're indispensable, obviously, but they really do require public rules and strategic, targeted investments to ensure prosperity is shared broadly, and, critically, that the economy is resilient enough to handle these huge transitions we're facing, like the shift to clean energy. So my framework prioritizes risk sharing and long-term public benefit. Okay, so my core thesis here is that economic vitality is best achieved when you keep government spending, taxes, and regulation, lean. This approach, it's founded on the belief that a restrained government allows private actors, investors, workers, to make the most efficient decisions about capital. Now, when we talk about reducing friction, we're talking about specific measures, like the 2017 tax changes. A key tool there was the immediate expensing provisions.
For listeners who might not track every single tax detail, immediate expensing just means businesses can write off the full cost of new machinery or equipment right away, instead of spreading that deduction over many years. This is basically the ultimate incentive for capital expenditure, or CAPEX as we call it. You pair that with regulatory restraintless compliance costs, faster project permits, and this whole approach, it offers an edge in the speed and the cost you need to unlock rapid private investment.
I come at it from a different angle, really, one rooted in historical evidence that markets, they consistently underprovide certain public goods, and they often fail to manage these large-scale societal risks effectively. We just can't rely solely on, the trickle-down effect of tax cuts. Instead, I'd argue we require targeted taxes on the highest earners or the largest firms, those who've benefited most from the existing structure, frankly, to fund crucial public goods and, importantly, reduce structural deficits.
Okay.
The difference lies in our focus: strategic public investment. We're talking about areas markets are often hesitant to tackle alone. Basic research, building resilient infrastructure, semiconductors, guiding those clean energy transitions. Look at the historical payoff of something like the interstate highway system, or the foundational research the government supported that gave us GPS and the internet. And beyond that, public scaffolding through social insurance like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC, or the Child Tax Credit, CTC, that provides crucial financial stability to families. It ensures broader participation in the workforce and ultimately builds economic resilience.
That's an interesting point about the historical context, yeah. But let me challenge the mechanism you're relying on today. If you significantly hike tax rates on firms and investors, you create immediate economic distortion. Investment decisions are, let's face it, highly sensitive to after-tax returns and predictability. For small businesses, for example, high rates can really deter expansion, and they risk pushing vital economic activity offshore.
Our framework isn't just pushing for low headline rates, it's pushing for base broadening and simplicity. The goal is a more neutral tax code, one that doesn't pick winners and losers and encourages work and savings universally. If investment is deterred by high rates, the whole capital pool shrinks, and ultimately everyone suffers through lower productivity and weaker wage growth.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy the premise that the primary policy lever should be this sort of indiscriminate lowering of headline rates. because the empirical evidence, I think, consistently undermines two core claims of that model.
Okay, which ones?
First, this notion that these tax cuts pay for themselves. I mean, that's been repeatedly shown to be, well, inaccurate. They often lead to significantly bigger deficits, which can potentially fuel future inflationary pressures, something we both agree harms middle and fixed-income households most. Second, and this is crucial, the benefits skew overwhelmingly toward the very top. We saw pretty weak wage gains for lower and middle earners following the last major corporate tax overhaul. It suggests the link between corporate tax relief and shared prosperity is far weaker than proponents claim. So if the capital pool is growing, sure, but it's all concentrated at the top, then we fail the test of broad-based growth.
Okay, look, we both know the political climate often forces difficult compromises. If we were to negotiate, say, a revenue-neutral trade-off right now, hypothetically, I might accept a modestly higher corporate rate if, and this is a big F, we guarantee permanent full expensing for new manufacturing and equipment. That maintains the critical investment incentive, the timing, the certainty of writing off new machinery while still providing a stable revenue stream for government functions. You know, the certainty of immediate expensing often matters more to a long-term investment calculation than the marginal headline rate itself.
I see the tactical merit in that compromise, yeah. It certainly addresses the need for investment certainty. However, it really only works if we commit to robust enforcement and ensure that the revenue derived from that modestly higher rate is actually directed toward critical public goods, not just absorbed by the deficit. We absolutely must see that money translate into genuine public value, like advanced manufacturing hubs or apprenticeship programs.
Okay, fair point on enforcement. Let's pivot now to what I see as a crucial failure point for the incentive focus framework, regulation. The intense focus on maximizing private speed, it seems to fundamentally ignore the market's need for guardrails, and often, I think, grossly underestimates the distributional effects. We need pro-worker rules, things like wage theft enforcement, guaranteed overtime, protecting collective bargaining rights to truly level the playing field.
Right.
Furthermore, we need measures for financial stability. This is where things like the ACA's insurance subsidies play a role. They don't just provide health care, they provide economic stability. They reduce the risk of, a single health crisis wiping out a family's financial stability. Light regulation arguably increases externalities, meaning the private actor gets the benefit while the public bears the cost, whether that's through, say, environmental degradation or financial volatility.
I understand the demand for guardrails. I do. But the cost of achieving that stability through regulation is often, government bloat, bureaucratic misallocation, and critically, regulatory drag. Think of regulatory drag as the friction that just slows everything down. Slows down building new housing, new factories, critical infrastructure. Painfully slow permitting times directly stifle development and investment. That harms affordability and growth right across the board. Take energy, for example. Achieving true energy abundance, which is absolutely essential to lowering input costs for every industry, requires speed. Whether it's building new fossil fuel infrastructure or, frankly, new nuclear plants, the ability to build quickly and efficiently is hampered by layers upon layers of bureaucratic process. It often takes 5 to 10 years for a single project review. That delay, that's inflation. That's opportunity cost compounded year after year.
Okay, can we maybe find some common ground on that speed element? The source material did note that a core bridging idea involves faster permitting combined with real non-negotiable safeguards. So I propose we adopt a concrete target, say 12 months for federal environmental reviews for all clean energy and manufacturing projects.
A 12-month target?
Yes, but, and this is crucial, this must come with mandatory non-negotiable safeguards. I'm talking about genuine community consultation, ironclad remediation requirements. We cannot sacrifice necessary environmental and social protections just for speed, but we can eliminate bureaucratic redundancy. This could potentially marry speed with necessary protection, addressing, perhaps, the key vulnerability of the incentive framework, underestimating those external costs.
That firm timeline is certainly attractive, I'll grant you that. Reducing uncertainty is necessary to boost private investment. But I remain unconvinced that simply establishing a target,
solves the accountability problem. I mean, who gets penalized when the federal agencies take 18 months, not 12? Unless there is a mechanism, some kind of statutory trigger, that forces the project to proceed after the deadline, regardless of review status, then the drag will just persist. My concern remains. Your framework seems to prioritize process over the actual outcome.
Okay, that's a fair challenge on the enforcement mechanism. Let's pivot now to what is arguably the trickiest part of both our frameworks: long-term sustainability and systemic risk.
Agreed.
Deficit worry isn't just an accounting issue. It's about generational risk. I think we need to define a concrete 10-year primary deficit target and specify ahead of time which programs or taxes would change to hit it, including perhaps a trigger mechanism if projected growth disappoints. Clarity and discipline. That's the path to long-term stability.
That's a compelling argument for discipline, certainly. Though I would frame the risk somewhat differently. While debt is a serious concern, absolutely, the public investment framework provides, I think, structural advantages in risk sharing, particularly through what economists call countercyclical policy.
Right.
For the listener, countercyclical policy is essentially the ability to deploy support, things like unemployment benefits or infrastructure funding, quickly during an economic downturn. The goal is to stabilize families and shorten recessions. We have empirical comfort with this approach, and, by shortening a recession, you reduce long-term economic damage. Public investment, if executed efficiently and targeted at high ROI projects, provides significant returns on investment. We really must focus on expanding evidence-tested programs like improving the administrative capacity of the EITC or expanding apprenticeship pipelines, which demonstrably boost human capital.
Okay, but we must both address the elephant in the room here and acknowledge our respective structural vulnerabilities head-on.
Agreed. We should.
I have to acknowledge the real risk that critics rightly point out. Deficits can still rise significantly under the incentive-focused framework if our pro-growth tax cuts ultimately outpace the revenue gains. This weakness persists because, let's be honest, the political system makes it nearly impossible to implement discipline on spending after tax cuts are enacted, or to allow temporary cuts to actually sunset when you're supposed to. This is a significant structural dilemma for the private enterprise model.
And I, in turn, must acknowledge the profound challenge inherent in my framework: implementation risk. Public investment relies entirely on efficient execution, and we frequently see procurement flaws, bureaucratic inefficiency, political capture, you name it. Think of the gap between passing a multi-billion-dollar law to build infrastructure and actually ensuring those bridges get built on time and on budget without funds being mismanaged. That execution gap is a massive hurdle for the public investment strategy, and it often leads to low returns on investment, which frankly validates some of your arguments about government bloat.
So, to summarize my position, if you want economic vitality, you focus on reducing structural friction. That means cutting taxes where appropriate, simplifying energy projects, reforming permitting. It's about maximizing the incentives for private capital formation. This, I argue, is the surest, fastest path to higher productivity and GDP per capita, ultimately benefiting everyone.
And I restate that resilient and broad-based growth requires public scaffolding. It needs robust risk sharing through social insurance and strategic mission-driven industrial policy. These public supports are, I believe, necessary to tackle the big, long-term societal challenges, things like critical supply chain resilience and the climate transition that private markets often fail to adequately address on their own timelines or at the scale required.
Ultimately, it seems both sides can agree on the value of competition policy that targets market power without sort of blanket hostility to scale. And both agree, I think, on the necessity of defining guardrails to ensure debt sustainability.
Yes, absolutely. What this discussion really illuminates, I think, is that the divergence isn't simply about whether markets are good or bad. It's about where you place your fundamental faith in the system. Is it in the individual incentives of private actors, or is it in the collective power of strategic public action? The path forward, whichever framework one prioritizes, demands rigorous attention to implementation details and an honest recognition of the necessary trade-offs that unfortunately often get crowded out by simplified political narratives.